All right, if I can go ahead and get everybody to come on in and find a seat. We want to get started here in just a moment. Have a few things that we need to take care of before we do. Walk, don't run, please. 21 on the 28th, 7 on the 26th. Is that right? Oh, Nayla. You come up this side, Nayla. Can I ask her how old she's going to be? How old are you going to be? You don't know? What year? Yeah. Okay. She's okay. All right. Well, how old are you going to be? 13, 14? No. 20? All right. So Raph, oh, wow. All right, we're running out of stage here. Did I miss anybody? Did I miss anybody? Everybody? Okay, now I have to do this. This sweet little young lady, she likes to come up and tell me jokes from time to time. So she come and told me a joke just a bit ago, and I thought it was a pretty good one, so I'm going to let her tell the whole congregation the joke. Okay, you ready?
Why do melons get married?
Oh, I don't know. Why do melons get married?
'Cause they can't elope.
You're just so stinking cute. Okay. Is there anybody else that we missed? Any special anniversaries that we need to know about? Anybody having an anniversary? I know we have some newlyweds that have just rejoined us. There's one of them. I'd figure he'd be like stuck to you like glue right now. Do what? Oh, he's with Aiden? Okay. All right. Any anniversaries that we want to recognize? Okay. So, all right, well, that's got a good group of people. So, who is going to sing? You know, Al McDuff, I've never heard you sing. You got two people up here you got to sing happy birthday to. And your daughter is shrinking back into the shadows. So you lead us, everybody, and let's sing happy birthday to all these folks.
Be the birth anniversary, right?
No anniversary, so
there's no anniversaries.
no.
Okay.
But if you can do it anyway, if
Ready?
you want to.
No, we'll do birthdays.
All right.
All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, everybody. Happy birthday to you. All right.
Okie dokie. I need you to do something for me. I don't want to put my boot all over that. All right, so we are going to dismiss into our classes. Are we doing 1 or 2 treasures classes? 2? All right, so the treasures class 4, 5, and 6, you're going to follow these ladies right here. If your child is new to the treasures class, they're asking that one of the parents just very quickly go and speak to one of the teachers so they can just get some information real quick. But 4, 5, and 6, we're going to dismiss you first. Okay. All right. 7, 8, and 9. Treasures, 7, 8, and 9. Rachel Miller, don't go anywhere. Where's your husband? John and Rachel, y'all come up here to the stage, please. I heard a tale. Al, you're on standby. I heard it was your anniversary. And they were not going to tell us. It's your mommy and daddy's anniversary, Sarah. So how many years? 24. Okay. So see, if y'all had come on up, it wouldn't have been nearly as noticeable. So we're going to sing happy anniversary to the Millers, all right? Is there anybody else trying to, skirt out of here? All right. So Al, come back up here. Now you just get to sing happy anniversary and lead us.
I told you we were supposed to sing happy birthday earlier.
And I told you to go ahead and do it, and you said no.
Ready?
So see, now you get to get up here twice.
Okay. All right. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary, God bless you. Happy anniversary to you.
Hug her, John. Give her a hug. I'm pushing it now. Congratulations, Joe. All right, junior quiver. Going to congregate over here on this side of the room, 10 through 13. All quiver. I'm sorry, all quiver. That's right. All quiver. Junior and senior quiver. All right. Alan? Yes, you. Please. Thank you, my son. Do you trust me? How much do you trust me?
Questions? I'm joking.
Yeah, right. I wasn't. Anyway. All righty. So does anybody want to kind of get us started over there? John, did you raise your hand? Uh-oh. I feel retaliation coming on.
No, I was just going to say, when you asked if he trusts you, I said, are you going to kill him or give him a wife? Which, some may trust you on one and not the
depends on what day that is, John.
Yeah. No, but my comment was about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac versus Lot and his two daughters. And it's interesting to think that they both came out of the same place, but yet Abraham apparently instilled in Isaac the faith of the father and trust in him, to where that he could both take him up to offer him as a sacrifice, but also that he could even send his servant to get a wife for his son. And Isaac trusted Abraham and the servant, but more importantly, he trusted the father to provide. And I mean, that's a lot of trust, to have your dad secondhand go pick a wife for you. So obviously he had trust in God, but yet Lot's two daughters didn't even trust anybody to provide a husband for him. And just that whole mess that came about with that. And it's just, I don't know, I just found that interesting. And as a father, where am I at with my kids? Do they trust me at all? And more importantly, are they trusting the Father to provide for them, for their needs and everything?
Then I would tag on to that where Lot's daughters are concerned. Was their environment contributing to their lack of trust in anybody? You know, what did that have to do with it? I mean, it seems obvious that Lot wasn't very diligent to pass the faith that he saw Abraham walk in. But how much did the environment influence that? And if the environment did play a part in that, to me it seems, a lesson to us, a warning to us as parents and grandparents today, not to turn a blind eye to the environment that our children are in and think that it's okay for them to have certain things in front of them all the time and that it's not going to have a negative influence, or that certain things, are going into their head through their ears and it's not going to negatively influence them. And not to get so busy in our, running around trying to make a living and ignore what the environment they are in has the potential to do. So we're going to have to work even harder, be even more diligent, which you're going to be hearing more and more about this, moms and dads, in the coming weeks. So, yeah, that is very interesting, John. Thank you, sir. All righty, who has the microphone? Jasmine. See, I got it twice in a row now.
I was just going to say, Rebecca, I always thought it was interesting in the Bible when she deceived Isaac and brought Jacob instead of Esau. And we're called to be like, Rebecca and everybody in the Bible, but she, in my view, I think she undermined Isaac in that point right there. And so I always kind of wondered why God kind of gives people, whenever they do things like that, like Rebecca, and when Jacob deceived Esau for the birthright and everything like that, why God blessed them so much, even though they did those things.
Is that a comment or a question?
Well, it's a question, but also kind of, I wanted to see what you were going to say about Rebecca and how she, in my viewpoint, she kind of undermined Isaac whenever she did that.
Well, first of all, we'll go back to the statement that none of these people are perfect, right? All imperfect, right? So, but all called according to a purpose. When it comes to, when this is getting into next week's, tour portion, but since we won't be here, when it gets into the whole thing with her pulling Jacob aside and say, you need to dress up and pretend to be your brother Esau, and et cetera, you go read the beginning of that Torah portion. She knew something that apparently Isaac didn't know. You remember, she was pregnant. Of course, she's been 20 years barren. And she's pregnant because Isaac interceded on her behalf. And then she gets pregnant, she conceives, and she realizes at some point she has twins. Let me back up. She realized there was something going on inside her womb that wasn't quite right. She was disturbed. And so she goes to inquire of the Lord, it says. And the Lord tells her, you have two nations growing in your womb. And paraphrasing, these two people are not going to get along with one another. And they're always going to be contending with one another. But then in the end, and this is the prophecy, the older one will serve the younger one. So that's what she was told before they were ever born. So she already knows that the older one is supposed to serve the younger one. But in the culture she lived, primacy was placed upon what? The firstborn, right? So who was the firstborn? Esau, right? So Esau comes out, and there's a whole, we could be here all day on this. This is like one of my soapboxes that I like to get on. I even wrote a book about it a few years ago. But Esau represents everything that we're not supposed to be, and there's a lot of things as it describes Esau, that it describes him physically, but it's also hinting at his character. For instance, he was hairy all over, it said. So much so it looked like he was wearing a hairy garment, all right? And the Hebrew word that is translated hairy is the same word translated as goat. So he's associated with the goats. Now, when Messiah comes, he divides the nations into what? Sheep and goats. Where do the goats go? To Gehenna. You understand? So there's a lot more to it, but Esau is representative of everything that we're not supposed to be. Jacob is a temperate man. And the Hebrew term is the same word that when God speaks to Abraham says, walk before me and be perfect, be tamim. All right, so he's that kind of a person, but he's the second born. And so Esau's got the birthright. What was Esau's perspective on the birthright? I'll let you answer. Okay. Didn't really care for it, right? Had no regard for it. It meant no more to him than a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. All right. So the birthright that we're talking about is not just some average family out here in Canaan. This is the family that God has made covenant with. All right. But that birthright didn't mean anything to him. His brother Jacob knows that, and that's why he says, sell me your birthright. Well, moms are pretty perceptive. They know their children, and she knows something nobody else knows. So when it looks like Esau's going to get that blessing, you know, should she have done it? Could it have worked out a different way? We'll never know. But she told Jacob to dress up like Esau. And Jacob is saying, and this is very important, I think, Jacob is saying, hey, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be perceived as a deceiver. In other words, it went against his nature to try to deceive. But he did what his mother told him to do. She knows something nobody else knows. All right? So again, was it the right thing to do? Probably not the most upfront thing to do. But in the end, and here's my point, and here's where I always land, it wasn't Esau's blessing to have. God had already determined that the blessing, the one he had his eye on was Jacob. So pause there. Let's run around Mount Sinai, okay? In the land of Israel today, there are people who live in the land of Israel, not Israelis, who claim the land is theirs. And what is the world's perspective of that when Israel, you know, is in a contest with them? You have an opinion? Do you understand what I'm asking you? Okay. Usually the world looks down on Israel if they get in a contest with these people. Okay. Does that change the fact that the land belongs to Israel? Okay. So likewise, regardless of how all these things happen, does it change the fact that God said, in a manner of speaking, that it's the second born who's going to be given the birthright and the blessing? Okay. Could it have come a different way? Should it have come a different way? We'll ask that in the kingdom and get the Messiah to clear it up for us. But the end result is Jacob is the one that should have had the blessing, should have had the birthright, ends up with the birthright, ends up with the blessing. And there's no record that Isaac, after he discovers what's going on, goes and, you know, just gives Rebekah an earful. So, anyway. So, does God bless people who do things that aren't right? And I'll close with this part with asking you this question. Not to put you on the spot, but have you always done everything right? Do you feel like God blesses you? Okay. Did I answer your question or even come close? Or at least I shared with you how I see it, right? Okay. I'm sorry? Oh, I can talk about this all day. Trust me. I'm not. But, you know, we'll debate whether it was right, and, you know, if Jacob was a deceiver going all the way into the kingdom. I will say that I believe that it went against Jacob's nature to try to deceive his father. And I do not believe that Yaakov or Jacob means supplanter or deceiver. It means hand on a heel. And there's a whole message in that as well. All right? Thank you. Yes, Miss Essie.
When you were talking about the matriarchs earlier, I kind of had this thought that a lot of the women that weren't doing things right, the Lord referred to Israel as a stiff-necked people, and they were also becoming prideful. And you were talking about pride earlier and how that's kind of the opposite of what it is to be that matriarch type of woman. And so it really just struck me that God doesn't call us to be stiff-necked. He calls us to be stiff-backed, because they were able to stand firm beside their husbands and to go with them into these things unknowingly. And they were able to be absolutely loyal to God and to their husbands, and they were willing to submit. So their necks weren't stiff, their backs were stiff. They were like, I will go with you anywhere and be bold in you. And so I just thought that was really cool, how a lot of people, instead of pride, our heads are to be low, but we're still to stand tall in God. So I just thought that was kind of cool.
Amen. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I like that new do you're sporting, by the way. Yeah. Did God require his family to live in tents to signify we were sojourners, not to mix with the world? Ease in commissioning us, so we did not amass and bond with things or a deeper truth. All right, let me read this again. Did God require his family to live in tents to signify we were sojourners, not to mix with the world? Okay, we are sojourners, and we're not to mix with the world. Did living in tents have something to do with it? Well, every year we go to Sukkot and live in these temporary dwellings to remind us that we are sojourners, but God is leading us through this world and he provides. So there's that. So I would say that he gives us a requirement to remember that our ancestors lived in booths and lived in tents and things like that because they were sojourners. That's part of it anyway. I don't know that I understand the wording and the rest of the question. Ease in commissioning us. I'm not certain. Does anybody understand what they're trying to say? So we did not amass and bond with things or a deeper truth. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it sounds like you might be asking, should we be living in tents and not have any property? And if I'm misconstruing that, you'll need to correct me. Abraham lived in tents, but Abraham was a wealthy man. He just was not in bondage to his wealth. So I don't know that the living in the tents was to make the point that they shouldn't have anything. I think the difference there would be when our stuff becomes our God. Like the young rich ruler that comes to Yeshua, hey, I've been keeping all these commands. What am I still lacking? And the conversation that takes place there, Yeshua ends up telling him, go sell everything you have, give the proceeds to the poor, and come and follow me. But he walks away because he was a very wealthy man. And then Messiah goes into how easy it is for the camel to go through the eye of a needle versus a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Point being is that in that particular case, his love of things was what held him back. But then like I said, we've got Abraham who lived in tents, yes, but who amassed flocks and herds and was a very well-off man. But his stuff did not keep him in bondage. He was not devoted to those things. He was devoted to God. So anyway, I don't know if I answered the question or if you're going somewhere else with that. But by the way, Robert, you remember that question we had last week that was up on the screen? We only got the first part, but there was a second part to it. You remember talking to me about that? Do you think you might be able to go back and define that? Because I was thinking about that earlier, that if we could find it, I'd try to do a better job of answering your question since I didn't get the whole question last time. If you can't find it, don't worry about it. But if it's something you can pull up quick, that'd be good. All right. Who has the microphone? Yes, sir, Bill.
Yes, Bill. My question concerned the 10 camels that Eleazar brought with him when he went searching for a bride. were the 10 camels bearing a gift for the prospective bride's family? And secondly, is there any scriptural basis where the groom's family should provide such a gift for the bride's family?
The way I read it, and everything I've read on the matter, is all these gifts came to her. Now, I don't want to take the time to read it all right now, again, but all the gifts, it talks about how all these gifts were given to her. Verse 22 of chapter 24, it came to pass as the camels had done drinking, that the man took a golden ring of half a shekel weight, 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold. By the way, there's some rabbinical commentary on that speaks to how that alludes to the 10 commands and the half shekel that would be paid, for the upkeep of the tabernacle and all the things that are connecting the service of Abraham and his family to what this young woman was coming into. That's just an aside. But again, it seems like that at least most of everything was given to her. As far as the 10 camels and what is the significance of those? As far as what it did practically, I'm not sure if there was provision was part of that, and if there was all these gifts that was included and all that, but emblematic of, at least this is what Brad would teach, this covenant that God made with Israel in these 10 commands that were given to us, and so it was kind of emblematic of that because these 10 camels went back with him. So, but I'll have to go back and read it again just to make sure, but I don't remember seeing anything in here where he's given all these gifts to Bethuel and Lavan and all that, which seems to be part of their problem, Now, that being said, was there any biblical mandate for you said the bridegroom's family, is that what you said? I'm going from memory here, and I forget the proper Hebrew term. And so if somebody thinks of it, you can let me know. But when we get on over into history, it seems to me in the back of my mind there was something that the prospective groom would give to that family, the father's family, because he's going to take his daughter from him. And so there was an evaluation of, what that meant to the family. And the term slips my mind right now. Well, I know we call it a dowry, but that was given to the bride, right? Am I not right in that? But there was some evaluation that was, made where they would give something to the bride's family. But again, the term is slipping my mind. Where that is in Scripture, I don't know that I've run across it. I'm going to climb out on the limb, and I might be proven wrong later, and I'm going to say that probably is a custom. But if it's in the Scripture, I haven't come across it yet, or it hasn't jumped out and bitten me. If somebody knows different, then that's fine. Speak up and let us know. All right? I'll think of the term about 3 o'clock this morning. I can't understand. Mohar, thank you. All right. All right. Did you find it? Here. I'm going to take the time to do this because we had a question come up last week. I only got the first half, and so it didn't make any sense. Right. All right. Very good. So I don't know if they're watching or not, but it says, help my cognitive dissonance. If you don't know what that is, ask David Degree. I've been taught to judge prophecy against the Scriptures. If it contradicts the Scriptures, the word cannot be from Adonai. However, and this is the second part that we didn't get to see. However, Adonai asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. If Adonai had asked me to do that, I would have thought that couldn't be Adonai. How do I reconcile that? Well, first of all, thanks, Robert. First of all, Abraham had quite the relationship with the Almighty, that sometimes the Almighty would visit him, sit in the door of his tent, and talk to him. And he had a pretty close relationship with him. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say he recognized his voice, first of all. So we need to be in a situation long before it gets to that kind of a challenge to be able to recognize his voice. My sheep know my voice. And so if we know his voice, we'll recognize it. And when he says to do something, not to do something, then we should respond. Second part of that is, I don't believe that God asked him to sacrifice his son, because I don't believe he ever intended that was going to happen. What I believe what was going on is he wasn't asking Isaac to die, he was asking Abraham to die, to be willing to die to everything. He had already called him out of Ur, leave your country, leave your family, leave your father's house. And Abraham's life story is about how we, being the seed of Abraham, are also going to be going through stage after stage after stage where we learn to die more and more and more to ourselves. And we learn things about ourselves. We say she's our sister. We do other things. And we learn to overcome those things, because eventually we're going to be called to go up to the top of Mount Moriah and lift up our only son and place him on the altar, because Isaac is the promise. Everything that had been promised to Abraham was through Isaac. In Isaac shall your seed be called. And so if he's going to be the father of many nations, it's going to come through Isaac. And that's why the writer of Hebrews talks about how, and I'm paraphrasing, that Abraham understood that even if Isaac were to be slaughtered, that because God had promised him something, that God would be obligated by his own word to raise him up from the dead. And so he went knowing that God would be faithful to his promise. So again, I don't believe that it's so much that God asked him to commit human sacrifice. I don't believe that at all. I believe that he was calling upon him, that is Abraham, to die to himself. And that's what we see. Because at the culmination of all this, he says, now I know that you would not withhold anything from me, not even your only son. I think that is the focal point. So if you're watching, die. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. If you're watching, then hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight. All right. A lot of talk on family today. Can you please address what the biblical view of family is? Many find ourselves slighted by blood for this walk, then call JT and sisters here family, but the world also says family are the ones that love you. All right, a lot of talk on family today. Can you please address what the biblical view of family is? Well, the ideal, of course, is one man, one woman, husband and wife, children being fruitful, multiplying, and not just in numbers of offspring, but in the offspring that will propagate the knowledge of the one true God through their generations. To be, as Abraham and his seed were called to be, a source of blessing to all the different nations. So I think that's the ideal view of family. But then also Yeshua says, when he's told your mother and your brothers are outside wanting to talk to you, and he said, who are my mother? Who is my sister? Who's my brothers? Those that keep the commandments of my Father. That's my family. So there's that aspect of it as well. So ideally, it seems to me that your family, your blood, would be people who obey the commandments of our Father in heaven. But our family is expanded beyond that, like we have in our congregation, people who are striving to keep the commandments of our Father in heaven. They are my brother, they are my sister, they are our family. And in a lot of cases, as you point out, some of that family is closer than many of our blood family. Where blood is concerned that are not in this walk, and we've been separated from them from this, that, and the other reason, I'm not ready to throw up the white flag and say I quit. I'm going to continue to believe that some of those family members, if I am producing fruit and if I am walking in integrity, good character, as we were talking about today, and represent the Messiah well, then I'm going to pray that he orchestrates circumstances and events whereby they're ready to hear what I've got to say. More importantly, what he has to say. Okay. So Stephen Lane gave me a verse of Scripture, chapter 34, verse 12. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give according as you say to me, but give me the girl to marriage. And this is, I don't know who's saying that. Oh, that's when they were negotiating for Dinah, after he had already raped her. Yeah. Isn't that right, Stephen? Where are you? Is that right? Yeah, okay. All right, so there is something in the Scripture there, Bill, that alludes to, this payment for a daughter, given to their family. Interestingly, this is coming from Shechem and his father to Jacob and his family. Anyway. But that's a convoluted story anyway, if you ask me. All right. All right. I'm going to think about that one. Who has the microphone? Yeah, Rosie.
Hello. Actually, I have two questions, and they're totally different from one to the other. First one is, last week's Torah portion, the Lord says to Abraham, go, lech lecha, go out of your father's house and your family. So he leaves, and now we have Isaac, or him, going back to the family and getting a wife for Isaac. Then later on, we see Rachel, or Yaakov, going back for Rachel, out of the same kind of family that God said, go from them. And I just wanted to know about you.
Well, I said it this morning, or I think I said it this morning, Rebekah's father and brother and family were idolaters, just like the Canaanites were idolaters. But Abraham came from among idolaters as well. And so there's not a whole lot of places that you can go to fetch a wife for somebody where they're not going to be in the midst of idolaters in the first place. Because Abraham is the guy who's kind of blazing the trail as it relates to serving the one true God. Would you say that's right? So where is he going to go? Right? So he goes back to his family, people he does know. But this, is going to get back over into the idea that, there are those amongst the heathen, if I can use that term, that God already knows their heart. He knows what's going on inside, and he can make those appointments. And I believe that's what happened when Eliezer is praying this prayer. He can't even get the prayer out of his mouth good before here comes Rebekah, and she's doing everything and responding in every way that he's looking for, so that he would know that his mission has been accomplished, that God has heard him, he has heard the prayers of his master, and he's made this connection. So he sees that character in her. And I think we could probably make, somewhat the same case to a degree when it comes to Rachel. Now, maybe one of the distinctions with Jacob and Rachel is that Jacob just saw how pretty she was, how beautiful she was, and he just fell in love. But now Rachel's going to be the one to hide her father's idols in the saddle and take them back with her. And Jacob's going to say to Laban when he overtakes them, if you find your idols, death is going to be the result, if you can find it here. Of course, she died on the way to Ephrathah, giving birth to Benjamin. So there are some distinctions there. But I don't know, where else were they going to go to find a wife that wasn't living among idolaters?
Oh, how does that relate to us? If the Lord says, go, and then we go for a while, and then we come back to get something that we left behind, per se, spiritually speaking?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't see Abraham going back. I just see him sending his servant to find a suitable wife, for his son. And by the way, and no one's ever asked this question, how come Abraham ventured out of the land of Canaan and Jacob ventured out of the land of Canaan, but Isaac never did? I'm asking y'all that question. So, Rosie, there's your homework. Okay? Oh, you have an answer? Okay.
Is it because he was an Olah offering?
That is what the commentaries suggest. He was kind of set apart in several ways, actually. But he's also he's devoted, in other words, and so that's why he couldn't venture out into the nations, so to speak. Right.
I also heard that the Canaanites were physical descendants of Ham, so that may be why.
Well, remember I said that they were just biding their time? There was a termination point for those people, and there was no future in that. Later on, Esau takes not one but two daughters of the land, the children of Het, as a wife, and it was much to Rachel's consternation. So there was something about those Canaanite women that the family of Abraham could not, or were not supposed to associate with. So given the options, I guess Abraham thinks it's best to go back to our family. But he doesn't go back and, dwell in that land. Isaac doesn't leave the land. Jacob is forced to go, in part because he's having to flee from his brother Esau. I don't have all the answers to that, but, those are just some thoughts. And what was your second question?
Okay, second question, it actually goes back to Noah, and then last week's Torah portion for Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. Because Abraham is telling God whether they're the righteous, if they're 50, if they're 45, and this is about children and babies, infants. In Noah's flood, everybody died. Everybody, babies, children, everybody died. In Sodom and Gomorrah, everybody died. And obviously, at the end of the age, children are going to die. And when he burns the whole earth with fire. So I'm just saying, are babies considered righteous or not? Why would they perish, in other words, with the rest?
Well, first of all, let's acknowledge that I am not sitting on the throne. There are some things that I cannot make a determination on because I'm not God. Now, where some of those nations of long ago are concerned, and in some cases where men, women, and children were wiped out, we look at it from this, point of view all these thousands of years later and go, why is that? That seems horrible. That seems cruel. But let me ask you this. You ever read stories about cultures that are on the earth today that teach their children to hate others so much that they will strap explosives on their children and their children will go detonate those explosives in a public place thinking they're going to a better place? You heard of that before? And so that hatred is ingrained in children and young people at a very, very early age. So do we allow that? And I'm not God, but does he allow that to remain, for that to propagate throughout the earth? I mean, I know hatred does. We don't know what these people were up to doing. It was pretty vile for God to say, wipe them out, because he's good in all of his ways. He's just in every way. He's not unjust. He's not unrighteous, And so there's things that we probably would not understand from a perspective that we have 3,500 years later, or 4,500 years later, or even 2,000 years later. So I just have to file that away into God knows what he's doing, even if I don't understand. But I can see things that are happening right now in this day and time where there are cultures, there are men, there are women, and both of them teaching their children to hate God's people in such a way that they literally strap explosives on them, give them AKs and, or whatever, and send them to be martyrs. And that kind of hatred being allowed to remain and to fester and then to propagate, maybe God was doing the world, a favor more so than he was being cruel to one group of people. And I know that the world can't wrap their brain around that. It's just like the flood itself. When you really think about it, the flood of Noah, yes, the world that was destroyed. But if the world that had not been destroyed, there wouldn't be a world today. And so it really was an act of redemption, redeeming his original purpose. And it had gotten to such a point that if he doesn't intervene and do something, it's going to reach a tipping point. It's going to go beyond, beyond the point of no return. It's going to be beyond redemption. So he intervenes. And yeah, on the surface, it looks horrible. People die, etc. But in many ways, it's intervention so that he can redeem the creation and redeem his people. When he comes back, and he comes from Edom, and they say, who is this that's coming up from Edom? And his garments are red, and he's been treading down the winepress, it says. He's destroying all of his enemies because he's a warrior. And why does he do that? Because there comes a point in time he says, that's enough. I'm ripping up the tares, I'm binding them in bundles to burn them and to remove everything that offends. Because at the end of the day, beyond everything else, God is holy. So that's the best I got. So I hope it helps at least a little bit. Find me another question. I don't know. I'll have to. That's something I can't answer off the cuff. I'd have to put some more thought into that. Yes, sir.
I've got one actually from Stephen Rhodes. He had to go home. What do you observe between the Torah reading and the gospel readings this week? For him, it shows a woman with good character at the well versus a woman with bad character or damaged character at the well with Yeshua. Rebecca said yes to the request for water and went further and offered water for his camels. The Samaritan woman did not get water for Yeshua and instead questioned him. But he thinks that's why he sought her out, because she wasn't that matriarch. She was someone who needed him and his living water, so he sought her out.
Well, I think he, to some degree, has already answered his question there, right? I mean, maybe she's not offering him water because of she feels that she's unworthy to do that, considering her present situation. Maybe. She's there at the well when all the other women don't come to the well because she's been ostracized from society because of her bad choices. And yet Yeshua doesn't hesitate to engage her in conversation. And by asking her for water, he knows what she is. He knows what she's done. And yet he says, will you give me some water? Which, was probably just the way to provoke the conversation in the first place. Which then speaks to the idea that there's no one beyond redemption. There's no one so far gone that they're beyond redemption. So it's the comparisons are good in the sense that, you got Rebecca and her good character, this other woman, her, at times lack of good choices. But I would even suggest that if Yeshua is having that conversation with her, then underneath all of that stuff, there's signs that there is good character in there. It just needs an opportunity to be redeemed. Yeah. All righty. I'm going to ask this question, but I need to look over real quick. All right, well, is there any possibility that the accounts of Genesis chapter 24 were related to the fall high holy days? And I don't know, maybe, but I'm not seeing the theme that you're seeing that you would ask that question. At least it's not jumping out at me right now. The only thing that just stands out that I might have some connection to the fall feast is the fountain of water that he's there, you know, and that is part of what we see at the end of Sukkot. You know, I don't know if that's what you're looking at or not, but you'd have to elaborate a little bit more because I'm not sure that I'm seeing what you're seeing. Who has the microphone? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's interesting, the comment that she was making about Abraham going and sending his servant to get a wife for his son. And I was thinking about that and going to go ahead and ask or just make a comment, and then it just kind of tags along with what she was saying. But when the servant, he said to the servant, go get my son a wife. And he said, well, what if she won't come with me? Am I supposed to then take him back? And he was like, no, do not take him back. And then he goes through telling him other things, and then at the end he says, do not take him back. And so it's like reiterating that Yahweh took him out, like he has pulled us out. He took him out, and he is saying, do not go back. And then we see in Jacob, because Jacob did go back, the claws that were in him that were trying to keep him from fulfilling his purpose that he had to fight to get away from. And even the idols that came with them that were trying to destroy. So I just thought that was very interesting, that when he calls us out, he doesn't want us to go back.
And it is puzzling to me that Jacob, you know, he is kind of compelled to do that, you know, and obviously it serves purpose, you know, but why Jacob and not Isaac? It's kind of interesting. I mean, they do have in common, don't marry any of the daughters of the land, right? But Jacob goes back. But then I could also make the argument with Jacob, you know, because he's Israel. Israel always multiplies outside of the land. Then they go back to the land. So there's that. Things that keep you awake at night. All right. Why are we to think that Rebekah did not tell Isaac the message from Yahweh about the two sons? Because I'd like to think that if she had told him that, then Isaac would have been, okay, well, Esau, you know, we're gonna give Jacob the birthright and the blessing. I don't guess there's anything in Scripture that says that emphatically. It just seems to be very strongly implied. But I guess you'll have to decide, you know, how you see that. All right, who has the microphone? Yes, sir.
I do. Some comments and then a question. One, back to Miss Rosie's question about the having to kill the children dying. One thing that always comes to mind is the story of Samuel and King Agag, and how they were supposed to wipe out the Amalekites, but because Saul didn't do that, then Agag had a descendant, and he almost wiped out the Jews during Esther's time. And so if they would have wiped out everybody like they were supposed to, then there wouldn't have been an offspring that would have potentially risen up and killed the children of Israel later on. In the story of Rebekah and Isaac, that story has always had a lot of meaning to me, especially after hearing Brad's teaching on Isaac and Rebekah. And one thing that always stood out to me was Bethuel, how throughout the whole thing, he's mentioned like 1 or 2 times, but it's more of Laban and the wife that have more of the say. So they're the ones who are being more involved in that kind of thing. And it just, Bethuel always struck me as somebody who was like the kind of father that just kind of checked out, like, okay, no, whatever. He just kind of went with the flow. And it kind of seems like a great example of a house of what things shouldn't look like. Because, of course, there's the idols and the idolatry, yes, but it seemed like the son was running things and the wife was running things and the father wasn't doing his part. And so fathers have been something that myself and a lot of the other young men have been talking about recently, and about the roles that the role that a father has in the household. And the Bible talks about restoring the hearts of fathers to their children and children to their fathers. Now, for the fathers, you ask the question, if you're asking the young adults, would any of y'all trust your mom or your dad to pick a spouse for you? And that gives you a good indicator of how your relationship is with your parents. And thankfully, praise Yahweh, relationships are not beyond repair. Because, my family and my parents and I didn't have a great relationship growing up, and then now it's so much stronger than it used to be. But for those parents or for those fathers that have messed up, what steps could they take to restore their hearts to win the hearts of their children whenever they feel like I've already gone too far, I've messed up too much, and I can't get them back? So what encouragement would you give for the fathers, and likewise, what encouragement would you give for the children?
For the fathers, to love God more than you love them. Because if you love God more than your spouse, your children, if your spouse and children have a heart for God, that'll make them feel secure. And that'll help bridge any gaps that, bad choices of the past have caused. I would also say to those parents who have in times past made bad choices that put some distance between them and a spouse or them and their children, that if you have been putting God first and pursuing God and you have produced fruit that remains, do not allow anyone to hold you hostage because of what has happened in times past. Because at this point, it becomes their hang up, not yours. As far as the children, we'll throw the spouse in there. I've already answered that question. Because if you're that parent or loved one that caused you harm in times past, or you think they caused you harm in times past because of whatever, again, if they're pursuing God and that fruit is there, then it's kind of on you to let the past be the past and realize that that person's not the same today as they were back then. And hopefully you're not going to be the same person today that you were back then either. And not to hold them hostage because of things like that. So fruit that is good and that is abundant and that has remained, in my view, doesn't take away every hurt and every pain, but it should provoke us to surrender all and then leave it there. All right? Do you have any more online that you can bring up for me? I was wondering when you were going to raise your hand.
You could see it in my eyes.
I saw it in your eyes, yes.
Well, I'd been looking in Genesis 24, and the question came up about the woman at the well. So I have two questions, and this kind of ties that in. I was wondering what your thoughts were on the idea that after the test for Abraham with his only son and lifting up Isaac and the provided lamb, and that's how that's a picture of the Messiah. Then some people say that now when Eliezer goes to find the wife, that's a picture of the Spirit moving, right? So I was thinking there might be a connection with that with the woman at the well, because when you look up the word truth, Emet, its first mention is in Genesis 24:27. And that's when Eliezer says, "Blessed is the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness." So that's not the first mention of loving kindness, but that's interesting because that's connected with truth there. and his truth from my master. And as for me, the Lord led me. That's the first mention of the word led me on the road to the house of my master's kinsman. So that's the first mention of the word truth. And then it also is mentioned 2 more times in this chapter when he brings up in 24, 48, and 49. And he talks about, again, I bless the Lord, the God of my master who led me. That word again, that's nacha, truth, emet, on the path. And then he also says, if you will do loving kindness. So there's mercy again there with truth. So truth is there 3 times. Mercy and loving kindness is there twice. And it's talking about the path. And so we're thinking about Eliezer and that picture of the Spirit moving. And it shows up there in Genesis 24 where he's going and finding this bride by the water. And so if you look at the woman at the well, that's when Yeshua tells her, you worship what you don't know, but an hour's coming where we're gonna worship in spirit and in truth, right? And then also in John 16, when the Helper comes, this is 26, and John 15, 26, when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who goes out from the Father. So I think that because that's the first mention of the word truth, and it's 3 times there, it's only mentioned 6 times in all of the Genesis accounts, that there's kind of this undercurrent of the moving of the Spirit and the gifts for the bride and the calling of the bride and spiritual gifting for the bride with the 10 talents, was it, of gold, and the 10 camels. I'd like your opinion on that, but that's where my brain went when somebody asked about the woman at the well with the water.
Well, here is kind of a summary of my opinion. Eliezer means my God helps. He was Abraham's helper. And the helper is sent, outside of the land, into the nations, to look among the nations and all of that to fetch a bride, to find a bride, to lead her to the Son, who was out in the field, and as she is being presented to him, like God presents the woman to Adam in the very beginning, and that's a prototype for things that will come later, right? He goes to meet, and she covers herself, and the helper presents, so to speak, brings the bride to the bridegroom, So the fact that Eliezer means my God helps, he's my helper, and it's the helper that's sent to do this, kind of ties that all together. Now, the 3 mentions of Emet, I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew the word truth was there, but I never thought about that being connected to the day is coming and now is when those that worship the Father must worship him in spirit and in truth. But I do think that those 2 seemingly opposite encounters they're connected, And just to tag on to John, to the account of the woman at the well. I don't have it in front of me, but if memory serves me, when she goes back into the village and says, come meet a man that told me everything I ever did. And they come out and met him. It said that he went into this village and he stayed with them 2 days. And the Samaritans, if I can use this term, the half-breeds, the ones who had mixed all this other stuff together with the truth, right, were some of the first people to recognize Yeshua as being the Messiah. And he stayed with them for 2 days. And the day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. Oh, you don't know what you're doing. You're doing some things wrong. But the day is coming that you won't worship on this mountain or on that mountain. But you're going to worship my Father in spirit and in truth. So there's a prophetic element in that as well. Rebecca's a prophetic element. The woman at the well in John is a prophetic element, but they're both kind of bookends, I guess. Maybe that's not the right way to look at it, but they're connected. Yeah, without a doubt. Yes, Mike. Is it Mike or Michael? Which do you prefer?
It used to be Mike until a friend of mine asked me why I took God out of my name.
Michael, it is.
That's what I said.
Okay.
So the woman at the well, I had a comment on the 10 camels earlier, but then the woman at the well keeps coming up. I have learned something that might not be true. I had heard that she was not the floozy. Can I use that word?
You just did.
Yeah. So I have heard that she wasn't that kind of woman that I thought she was growing up in the church. What I came to find out that she was a barren woman. You know, why would a woman have 5 different husbands and not be stoned because she cheated on them? That's how, I grew up thinking that she cheated on him, and that's not what happened because she was still alive. So I had come to believe that she was a barren woman. What are your thoughts on that? And that's why she was in the well at the heat of the afternoon, because she didn't have children, couldn't provide a child for her husband. That's why they left her.
Hang on. Let me get there. There is this verse. I'm not saying that barren aspect isn't, I don't know. But he says this in verse 18. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. So it would seem that she's with somebody who, isn't her husband.
Right.
Okay. So maybe she's not a floozy.
Right.
But she's made some bad choices, perhaps, or maybe she's made a bad choice because of other things that have happened to her in life.
Right.
That would be very common, right? You've been done wrong and you've got a raw deal, and so, you go out and in your self-pity, you make a wrong choice. Maybe, I don't know. But at the time, she was living with someone who was not her husband. Which would help us understand why she's coming in the time of day when all the other ladies are not there.
Exactly.
Because she was, probably looked down upon, and maybe, possibly, barrenness was looked upon, as there was a stigma attached to it. You're not fruitful. Well, it is our nature to see that person and go, Rabbi, who sinned, his father or their mother, right? But sometimes things happen just for the glory of God.
Right.
All right? Did we address your question?
Yeah. Number 2, the Midrash that's fascinating about the Bethuel. Bethuel? Did I say that right?
It's floozy, Bethuel, however you want to say it, yeah.
Laban's father, Laban's father. He's not mentioned. He's mentioned at the beginning, but he's not mentioned after. And so I'm sure you know the Midrash that he was poisoned or he was taken out.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
I don't have any.
Okay.
I don't, and I don't have
almost
any.
didn't want to bring it up just because it's a fun thought, or a fun thing to talk about, but not important.
I don't really have an opinion. Okay.
Well, I know that all the riches went to her, and then Laban and Bethuel received fruit. And so, according to the Midrash, they were frustrated by that. And I'm wondering if even that frustration flowed through to Laban, and that's how he turned into what he became.
And
that could be reaching.
He's a dark figure from the first time we see him, for sure. And ironically, his name means white, But I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on that, and because I haven't really looked into it that far, honestly. Suffice it to say, she was the fire plucked from the brand plucked from the fire, right? All right. Any possibility that Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, nursed Jacob after he was born? And if so, is there symbolic significance based on her name? First part of the question, I have no idea. Is there symbolic significance based on her name? Deborah? I'm going with I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand I haven't read that part of it in depth recently, so I don't know. I'm going to go with this. If I don't want a fly to get in my mouth, I keep it shut. So, sorry. I don't know. Yes, Lori.
I just wanted to make a little comment about the children. We've done a lot of study.
In accordance with what we were talking about this morning?
Children being, yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, I'm sorry.
So through homeschooling, Bible class, we've done a lot of stuff. You know, the flood and, when they start wiping out all these people and the kids are just like, the babies, the animals, they can't understand. So one of the things I kept praying about, Lord, how do I explain this? I have my own thoughts, but how do I explain this? And what came to my mind is if every single one of those children who died underage, what is the percentage of those children ending up in the kingdom? Okay, they've not made any decisions, they're children. God's going to redeem them in the kingdom. If they grow up in that, with the preconceived notions of their family, their fathers, their communities, they're going to, like what you said, propagate the evil. And so we have to realize death isn't a punishment. It's the moment we're born, we're all gonna die. So we die at different ages, different stages, but these children were mercifully actually saved from death by being killed in the moment. And that helped the kids understand it a little bit better, because they really do need to understand that our God is a merciful God. He, wiped out people that were only going to make the world like it was when it had to be destroyed the first time. He knows what he's doing. But I think that teaching them that the children having to go too was a mercy, not a punishment. I just wanted to say that because it just kept coming back in my head through this whole time, that it seems so mean and so cruel, and how could God do this? But when you really, really think about it, most of those kids probably didn't have a chance because they were brought up in such a horrible, horrible way. So that's all. I just wanted to say that.
I will say that there are things worse than death, And again, none of us sit in God's seat, so we don't say anything. I'm not going to say anything dogmatically. But it does make sense to me that there are times when children who perish young, not every case, some cases, that people, kids that perish young, children that perish very young, may have been spared a fate that is worse than death. And I think that's kind of going along with what you're saying, because if they grow up in certain environments and they become this awful thing, they're going to suffer and many others are going to suffer. Apples and oranges. My dad, I've talked about my dad a lot and using him as an example in some things. My dad was, he was born out of wedlock. He was pretty much just given away. He was raised by a family. They raised him as theirs. They loved him. They took care of him. From what I can tell, they spoiled him. And then later on, he found out he was adopted. He was mad, and he was, just very angry about all of this and thought that this other woman had just given him away. And then later in life, when he met his half-brothers and heard the stuff they went through, he realized she did me a favor. She did me a favor by doing what she did, because I was raised in a much better way, in a much better environment. And so apples and oranges. But the idea that God does things that from our point of view, with the way we think and the way we view the world, it's easy for us to say, well, that's harsh, that's cruel, that's mean, that's this, that's that. But we're not God. We don't see everything from his point of view. We don't know the facts on the ground. We're looking at this from millennia between us. between us and what happened. And so we do need to default that to the point that our God is just, our God is merciful, our God is love, and he is never going to do anything that is unjust, even to those who are not just themselves. So, thank you, Lord. Since Sarah was a strong, faithful matriarch, how can we reconcile that with the opinion that she died because of the events on Mount Moriah? Wouldn't that be a monumental lack of faith? I don't think that these patriarchs and matriarchs were infallible. I don't think that they were perfect people. I don't think that they were without their, their hiccups, Whether or not she died because of the events on Mount Moriah, that's just, that's a tradition. It may or may not be that way. But let's just, for the sake of the argument, say it was. And by that time, she knew her husband was going to do whatever God asked him to do. So, if Abraham, according to the writer of Hebrews, is going to walk through this and do this because he believes that God is going to be bound by his word to raise Isaac up from the dead, then perhaps she knew that her husband was going to follow through with anything that God told him to do. I don't know. Would you consider that a monumental lack of faith, or would you consider that a human response to someone that you love dearly may not be coming back? So, I don't know. We'll have to leave that in the realm of conjecture. I don't know. Who has the microphone? Yes, Ryan, who's sitting right behind Gewit.
I just want to thank you, first off, for your message today. There was a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot to chew on, especially for someone my age. Just a lot there. Going back to the question that you asked, and that is, would you trust your parents to choose your significant other, your spouse? I'll answer that in a sec.
Dun, dun, dun.
Ultimately speaking, I kind of want to rephrase that question, if I might.
You may.
Do you trust the Father in heaven to choose your spouse? If that, I would assume the answer would be yes. And for me, that's yes. If my father and my mother walked up to me together in unity and asked me, hey, there's someone that we think is the right person for you, and they walked up to me together, then yes, I trust them, because the Father placed them in a position over me. They placed them in a position where I have to trust the Father that they also trust the Father. And they're in that position over me, right? So if the both of them came to me in unity, then yes, I would.
Okay. They told me just a little while ago that they've been meaning to talk to you about something.
I gave them each $20.
So just saying.
I'd like to hear that.
Bring it.
But that's a fair kind of change on that. It's not really a question of do you trust your parents, because ultimately the Father placed them there in that position, and you have to trust the Father that he not only has the right direction for you, but that he's also talking to and through your parents.
So when I followed that up and said, parents, if they wouldn't trust us, why? Kind of connects to that, because if they haven't seen any evidence in the parent's life that they trust God, follow God, and they've seen that trust and that confidence in God, demonstrated to the point, they've seen him answer, it would be kind of hard to do that. Were you going to say something else?
Not really, besides the point that I have no idea what that would look like in this modern age, but...
Well, that's true. And it's not very common, is it?
Not at all.
In fact, I'm trying to think of one time that I've seen it. But I'll talk to the parents because I are one, It's as important for us to disconnect our way of thinking from what we were taught in the world as it is for you young people to disconnect from what the world's trying to teach you today. Because we grew up in a time that this was the normal thing. This is the way you did things. Now, I'm gonna say this, and I hope this is okay. I was in a relationship before I met Beth, and I thought it was a good relationship, but my mother did not. And she went to praying. And those prayers got answered. And that ended that relationship. And it wasn't very long, I don't know, a year, couple of years, something like that, and I met her. And there's no doubt in my mind that even though my parents didn't come to me and say, this is wrong or this is right, what have you, I do believe that God honors a parent who's trying to do the right thing, trying to approach things in a righteous manner in the best interest of their children. And I can say that without a doubt that my mom's prayers saved me from a life of torment and turmoil had it gone the other way. Because, see, I had to have Sarah, right? So that's one facet of how it might look in today's world. And even, in that situation, I wasn't even conscious of any of this kind of stuff. I was just doing my thing. Is that okay? All right. Anything else? All right. Yes, Miss McDuff.
Is it all right if I ask a question that's like off topic?
No.
Okay, well.
I don't know how far off topic.
I mean, it's about the whole Bible. So.
Okay. Well, that narrows it down.
Yes, it does. So.
Go ahead. I'm just playing with you.
Yeah. So for the past probably month or so, just a question that's been running through my mind is about like the 66 books that we have in our canon and how we got there and how we know, the books that we have. I know that those are legitimate, but there are other books outside of that. And so are those legitimate? Because, there's not that I'm not arguing for or against them, but like Enoch and Jasher, and I know that there's another book of Esther, and, there's the Maccabees. Are those legitimate, or are those, I don't know, just more so things for us to read, and it's kind of neat, but it's not, scripture.
I am one of those that believe that the books we have are there for a reason, that God watches over his word, and I believe that he's given us what we need. Are there other books that the Bible itself refers to that we don't have? Or we have, some we do, some we don't. And that's even debated, the ones that we do have, is it the one that's referred to in the Bible? And there's different opinions on that. But where some of these other books are concerned, I'm not saying that we shouldn't read or look or glean from them. My thing is, but that it should always agree with what we're reading in the scripture that we do have. Okay? So, and I pick on Stephen, but Stephen's a very smart guy, and he reads some of these other, works in these books that you're talking about. And so there's been times that he's brought some of those things into what he teaches, but he always makes certain that it agrees with the scripture that we've already got. It might fill in some blanks about some things that we don't have. Is that exactly the way it would happen? I don't know. But if it doesn't take away from and diminish, undermine, contradict, then no harm done, But there are the lost books of the Bible, so to speak, that are, and I think you would agree with this, that some of these so-called lost books of the Bible speak contrary to what the Scripture says and gets into fables and these all kinds of crazy things. I'd be very, very, very leery of that kind of thing, all right? So, personally, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in those other books. There's enough here to keep me busy for the rest of my life, okay? But for those like Stephen who do take the time to study those things, and there are others, I'm willing to listen to what they bring to the table if it helps, support and strengthen what I'm already learning in the Scripture that we have. Does that make sense to you? How did I do? Thank you. All right, did I answer your question? All right. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned the name Laban means white. Does that reflect into his character, or why white?
I don't know. His father looked at him one day, said, "You're a white boy." All right? I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you. Okay. All right. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I mean, I was curious because I guess white, as in the sense how people are dead, there's no color in them, they're white. In that sense, or I don't know. Does it reflect in his character?
Well, let me say this. I kind of was flippant about it, and I shouldn't be. The name Lavan is related to the word for brick. And you'll find that in Genesis chapter 11, because that's what Babylon was constructed of, right? And what does Babylon represent? Everything that's in opposition to God, right?
Exactly.
So Jerusalem's comprised of stone. Stone is something that God creates, God forms, God shapes. And then in the city, Jerusalem, and what is emblematic of, he fits those stones together, it's compacted, it says, but it's the city of the great king. Where Babylon is constructed of man-made materials, brick, things that men do, the works of their hands.
Brick and mortar.
Yeah, right. And by the way, brick is clay and mud and straw and water and all these things mixed together, because that's what Babylon is, a mixture, very literally and figuratively. So whether or not his father had all that in mind when he named him Lavan, I obviously don't know. But thematically, it kind of connects to the idea of Babylon, right?
Okay.
And so, maybe there's something there to run with. But beyond that, I don't know.
I was just curious. You said white, and well, why? But bricks makes sense.
Well, I do believe that there's a reason that Moses wrote down all this information, including names and ages and all that kind of thing. Do we understand, or do I understand every significant component of it? No, I don't. We speculate sometimes. So there might be something else to it that I'm not aware of. Probably is. But that's the only thing that, that I've come up with so far that might speak to his character. I'd just add one other thing. Maybe there was something about his physical appearance that provoked the name that, again, might be connected to his spiritual attributes. And he represents everything that results in death, right? Anyway. I'm sorry? No. Where's the mic? Yep.
Hello. I have a question. I really loved your message today. What the Father brought was just incredible. There's a lot to impact. But one of the questions I had that you were talking about how Sarah, in reference to like she spins flax and wool, and I think if I remember correctly, you said that represented knowledge and discernment. Is that correct?
In Proverbs 31, it says that the virtuous woman seeks wool and flax or wool and linen. So, rabbinical commentary just takes the position that particular verse, and, not just that verse, but the verse is about a virtuous woman, relating it to Sarah. But that particular one speaks to how Sarah could discern between things that, are individually serve a purpose but shouldn't be blended together, i.e. Isaac and Ishmael specifically. And so this woman's son is not going to have any part with my son. So she realizes that Ishmael would be a detriment to Isaac. Ishmael has his own destiny, so to speak, his own journey, his own purpose, but Isaac has his. But the two of them can't fuse together. This is like Esau and Jacob. One's going to always be contending, or lording over the other. And if one rises, one diminishes. But in the end, the older one's going to serve the younger. Jacob is going to put his heel on Esau's head rather than the other way around. So in a similar vein of thought, she foresees, is able to see that they can't go on and coexist together. So that's, a rabbinical commentary on that particular part of Proverbs 31 and relating it to Sarah's ability to discern things, how it relates to the promise of Isaac and how Ishmael would be a detriment to that. So anyway, probably got too wordy, but.
No, that was fantastic. My name's Sarah, so I take this message particularly really to heart. Like, okay, Father, what are you really speaking to me? And I'm sure everybody else does too, but that really stuck out to me was just that she had discernment. We gain a lot of knowledge in this movement where, whatever, we gain a lot of knowledge, but having discernment to know what the Father is saying, to know what the Father is trying to, what he's trying to relate to us, what he's speaking, I think that's huge. And then the discernment to know what he wants us to do and where he wants us to go and, what his purpose is for us. And obviously, Sarah must have had a pretty good understanding of that she was able to, she helped raise her son. I'm sure it wasn't just Abraham that raised him, right? She raised him as well. She trained him up as well. So I hope that I have that or gain it.
Well, as one who at one time did not have any discernment, chairs could have been floating in a room and I would have not picked up on it. But because of my wife praying and me praying for discernment, I believe that God has helped me with that. And all of us need discernment. Because if we're not able to discern between good and evil, black and white, wheat and tare, we're going to have a mess, Well, we have a mess out there, and we've got to be able to discern between clean and unclean and all these things. So if we don't have it, and I don't know that we're necessarily born with it, but as God's people, we need to have it. And I believe that goes along with being filled with the Spirit. The more of His Spirit, the less of us, the more we're going to be able to discern between holy and profane, common and clean. And as the days get worse, and the Bible tells us that's pretty much what's going to happen, we're going to need that discernment even more so, in greater measure. So if you haven't thought about that before, we need to start thinking about that. And it's not, you're not too young to start thinking in those terms, some of you younger people, that we need discernment. The the devil's playground, as far as I'm concerned, is not in the realm that is completely and totally and obviously wicked. That's not where he tends to hang out. He tends to hang out in the area that is wickedness mixed with good, which is the greater region, because that's where it's easy to confuse evil with good. That's where it's easy to confuse tares with wheat, and that's where he does his best work. And that's why we have to have discernment that comes by the Spirit. So, with the exception of Midian, what became of Abraham's descendants? Well, for instance, Ishmael, right? Well, Ishmael is one of the fathers of the Arab people. Midian as well. Was Keturah also the same person as Hagar? Don't know for sure. Personally, I tend to doubt it, but there's a lot of tradition that says that they were one and the same. I just always wondered, well, if it was the same person, why didn't they just say Hagar? But, that's me. All right. Who has the mic? Anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you also, what happened to those descendants from Keturah, his second wife. And I have another question, and this might...
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I misread the... Oh, okay, never mind. I'm sorry.
This may seem a little insignificant, but when I was reading the Torah, I was noticing how that Abraham was... he was in Beersheba where he made a covenant with Abimelech, if I'm saying that right. And it says that he sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. And then the story goes on in chapter 22, how that he went and he offered Isaac and at the altar and all that story about that. And then in verse 19, it says, so Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So then in chapter 23, it talks about Sarah dying in Hebron, or Kirjath, or however you say that. So
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. Okay, so I guess it just stood out to me. Did they never get back together? I mean, they lived separate places, and I mean, that in the way I was reading it, it looked like they lived in. He went to Beersheba, and she dies in Hebron. I'll say Hebron, and Abraham went there to mourn for her, and it looks like they never did get back together.
The fact that he came to mourn for her is the reason that some believe that he was off doing this thing in chapter 22 with Isaac, and she dies while they're away on that journey. Again, don't know for sure, but as far as them being apart, Beersheba and Hebron are right next door.
Oh.
Yeah, a little bit of a walk, but they're not, these huge, great distance apart from one another. So, in fact, not that it matters, but there's a place called Susia that's down in that same area. And in Susia, you can see where Beersheba is, and then there's Hebron, So they're kind of very, very close proximity. So I don't know that that necessarily means that they were apart. They obviously spent time apart. I don't see that it means that they were just, living two separate lives necessarily.
Okay. Well, I was just questioning it.
Well, that's all right. You can.
I could have a question now and then instead of a comment all the time.
You're. Was there something else?
No. They had asked the question I was going to ask about those other descendants. What happened to them?
Well, the main ones that come to mind, is Ishmael, Midian. Together, those, really form the father of the Arab people. So those people are still there. They're still descendants of Abraham in that region who aren't from the lineage of Jacob. So, and they have been blessed, right? Okay. Is there a spiritual reason for Rebekah holding a jar of water on her shoulder? The bride priest carrying the ark on their shoulders? I don't know. I'm not trying to be flippant. I don't know that there's a spiritual reason for that. It might be just practical to do that. I think it would be better than carrying it on her head. I mean, but no, I've seen, you've seen those pictures of those ladies that carry those things of water on their head. So anyway, seems to be more practical. Who's got the mic? Oh, okay, John. All right.
All right. I just want to thank you for the message today, as far as the patriarchy and the matriarchy, and it's the last several messages have really impacted me and convicted me, and I want to thank you for that and thank the Father for that as well. I think it was very interesting this morning when we were driving up. And we had a conversation with the girls, and I told them that their mom, my wife, is the matriarch, so I thought that was pretty fitting. So it's confirmation. But I am blessed that I do have a Sarah as well. I'm very, very thankful to the Father and to my wife for this covenant marriage. And, I'm thankful for a lot of things in life, and something that I dwell on from time to time is the faith that my grandparents had. Both sets of my grandparents were very strong believers in the community and in their respective churches. And to me, they were just larger than life. And I spent many, many, many hours over at their houses. I just looking through the Word and seeing that the notes that my grandmothers had made in the Scriptures, just very, very amazing, and how that led to my mom and dad being strong believers in the faith. And because of them and my grandparents, and even probably way before then, because of that line, that I came to the faith in Yeshua. So I'm very, very thankful of that. And probably about 20, 25 years ago, I had a conversation with my mom, and I said, Mom, I said, I love you, and I love Dad, and I love your marriage, but I want to have a better marriage than you guys. And in my ignorance, I had no idea what I was saying then. Like I said, 20, 25 years ago, just a single guy, and really had no idea of what the world really was and what marriage was, of course. I say of course, but I did see godly examples in my grandparents and in my parents. So I did have an idea to that degree. But as far as being married on my own, I know that it's been amazing. It's had its set of challenges, but that is something that I still hold true to that statement. I still want to have a better marriage than my parents. And the Father, through my wife and through many others, has continued to humble me in that regard, and for various reasons. But one of the main reasons is that I want the girls and any future children that my wife and I have to have a better marriage than we have. And that's what I think when it says that Abraham saw his day into the future and Yeshua and whatnot, that Abraham also saw the progeny and the promise that he had made, that the Father had made with him. And so I kind of hold to that too, in that we're Abraham's seed, and that the fact that we can see way beyond ourselves and into the future, that our children and our children's children, and going even further down than that, become stronger in the faith and are able to come closer to the Father than we are. And that's humbling for me to say, but that's what I truly desire.
I do too. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm done. So
well, I don't want my children to have to go through the season of undoing everything, or not everything, but a lot of things that I was taught. And I have to sift through all the things that I thought were the right thing and I thought were the truth, to figure out what the truth was and what's man-made and what's God and all those things. And not that my parents or my grandparents tried to mislead me. They did what new,
Amen.
right? Okay, and I'm thankful that they did it. You know, let me say this, and this is kind of a little off, you know, on the side of the road, so to speak, that we're walking down right now. But my mother's mother, her name was Lena, and you know, she had a rough life. And I remember as a kid, and she was at our house, and she was sitting on a couch in a little den that my father had kind of set up for, you know, library music and all this kind of stuff. And she had arthritis so bad, you know, her fingers were all gnarled and, you know, just physically she was in bad shape. But we were singing, and we were just singing some hymns and, you know, some spiritual songs and things. And I remember seeing her hands going up, and she could barely lift her arms. And she was in a lot of pain just to lift her arms, but she had tears streaming down her cheeks, and her arms, you know, she was trying to hold them up, and she was just trying to praise God. And here's why I'm saying this. She didn't know anything about all this stuff we're talking about. Nothing. But she loved God. And she taught her children to love God. And one of those children, my mother, taught me to love God. And my mother didn't know anything about all this stuff either. You know, the things that we're learning, I shouldn't say stuff. She didn't know anything about this. But I'm very thankful that there are people in my family that love God enough to teach their children who taught their children, or else who knows where I would be right now, right? And so I absolutely abhor this idea that people look down their noses at people who don't understand the things that we have been privileged to walk into. Because part of that is because of the people in our past who loved God and served Him the way they knew to serve Him is the reason some of us are here today.
Amen.
So I thank God for them.
Amen. You know, one of my grandmothers had dementia, and it was very tough watching her go down that route the last handful of years of her life. But one of the fondest memories that I have of her, and it was extremely hard to have any coherent conversation with her the last few years, but one of the fondest memories I have of her is her singing, watching the Gaither Vocal Band on TV and singing those hymns. She couldn't hold a conversation, but she could sing those hymns.
Stephen told us about his father who is Alzheimer's, dementia, Alzheimer's, but yet he's singing along with us as we sing some of these songs. You know, there are people who think that we should not sing hymns. Lord, I apologize. Do what? What was the middle part? Middle part of that word? I can't spell it. It's like, okay. No, thank you, John. And that, I mean, that really, so that rings true with me. It resonates with me because we tend to be so arrogant. Thank God for people in our past, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, that may not know and understand some of the mysteries of the kingdom that we've been blessed and privileged to come to understand. But they knew God. They knew they had a Savior. And they knew to pass that love for God down to us, even if it was, you know, very simple and even childlike. I thank God for it. Because as I said, I may not be here today were it not for that. And I thank God that I'm just thankful. Yeah. All right, one last one. John,
Yeah.
that seems fitting.
Well, I just wanted to kind of comment along with what y'all were talking about just now, as well as with Rosie's question, as far as if Abraham was called to leave his family and everything, why did he send someone back to his family for a wife. And I think there are times when God calls us to leave certain things, certain aspects of our life. Obviously, when we're born again, he calls us to leave everything in the past and follow him. But, you know, some of us were called out of regular churches. Some of us were called out of total heathenism to where we are now. But I think we need to be called out of certain things at times, even if they're not necessarily bad or sin, but we're called out of these things to put our focus on following God so that we don't have other distractions in our lives keeping us from that. And I think in some ways, like Abraham, even though he knew what he came from, that there was idolatry there, I think he also probably saw that there was some other good aspects to what he came from, whether it was a good work ethic or a hunger for the one true God, even though they might not have been following him. At the same time, he realized that it was better than where he was at the moment. And he was able to leave that to become what God had called him to be. So I think in the same way with us, we need to leave certain things from our past. But at the same time, there may be certain areas in our past that may not be totally bad that we need to, and this, like you were talking about, be thankful for and realize that there was good in there and that there was Yeshua there in some cases, and not totally just chuck it. But at the same time, maybe we need to leave that part, at least for a time, so that we could learn other things, so that we wouldn't be distracted in the area that God had us where we needed to grow.
And then at some point, we go back and we fish some more out of those places.
Yeah.
That's what I hear you leading up to.
Yeah, because, you know, once Abraham realized and grew to be a patriarch where he could give his only son, where he was totally, wholeheartedly for God and knew what was important and what was not, then he had the maturity and the strength to be able to send his servant back to bring out what was good and what needed to be brought out. So,
all right, here's what I hear you saying, even though maybe this wasn't you weren't thinking of it. You know, there was a reason for us to come out of the mainstream.
Exactly. Yeah, then that is what I'm, in a sense, trying to say with it.
Okay.
My words just need to
Well,
figure out.
that's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
There was a reason for us to come out of the mainstream, so we wouldn't be distracted, so we could learn these things, so we could internalize them and be grounded in them. And then at a certain point, to go back into those places from which we came, not to revert back to it, but to go fishing.
Yeah.
And to bring others out of that into more of what God is doing. That gives me what we used to call ghost bumps, John. That rings true with me. Thank you. Thank you. I see our little ones are coming in. It's 5:37. Don't hand that mic away. Why don't you just come on up here, please? Are we still waiting on some? All right. Well, when we get our little ones come in and sit down, the other ones might be coming in just a moment, but we're going to go ahead and pray and dismiss. And remember, we won't be here Wednesday night. And everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. And again, do just that. Give thanks. We won't be here on Shabbat. Some people were asking, how come we're not doing that? Sometimes I think we need to back up and just take some time to spend with, the ones that are very closest to us in our family. And just, God will be okay. He'll be all right. He can survive. And doesn't mean we won't observe the Shabbat. We'll just spend some time with our family. And because we need to spend some time with our families. We need to spend some time with our spouses and our children and just kind of, in some cases, reconnect, because The adversary wants our families, and we don't need to let that happen. So, you know what? So spend some time just having relationship with your family, all right? And, of course, then we'll be back Wednesday night a week from now, or a week from this Wednesday. And we'll be back here on Shabbat. Again, 2 weeks from now. And a reminder, I would like for everybody who can, especially those who have children, young people, young adults, I'd like for everybody to be here because I want to go over some things, address some things that I feel like is very important as a family, as an assembly, that we take note of, that we acknowledge and be on our guard about, because I don't want to give the adversary any credit, but he's good at what he does. And what he does is he steals and he kills and he destroys, right? And it has been given to us as his people to stand against the one who steals and kills and destroys. And if we close our eyes and we ignore and we pretend, no, it can't, nothing like that could ever happen in our congregation, then that's going to give him a foothold. And we don't want to do that, do we? All right? So a couple of weeks from now, this time we will be spent in just kind of having a family meeting, and not a rebuke and not a chastisement. Just here's some things that we need to be aware of and we need to be on guard against. And let's kind of everybody be aware of some things so that we can take care of business and we can go on. You good with that? Good. All right. Amen. So if you will stand, please. I want John to lead us in prayer as we dismiss. Everybody be safe. Encourage one another. Pray for one another. John.
Father, blessed be your great name. Thank you for your love, your mercy towards us. Thank you for teaching us this day from your word. Help us indeed to grow maturity to become matriarchs and patriarchs in your kingdom. Help us to raise our children well and in your ways, that they also may grow up to be matriarchs and patriarchs in your kingdom. Father, help us even as a congregation, as a body, to walk in those ways that would build up others and help them to be the people that they are called to be, that you have called us to be. Father, help us to grow in maturity, that we might be used in your kingdom, that wherever we came from, Father, that you would help us to go and share the truth of your love, share the truth of your Son, Yeshua, that others may come to be born again, Father, to be part of your kingdom, that those who are already part of your kingdom would come to a greater knowledge of who you are, your awesomeness and your power, your love, that we all might walk as part of your kingdom, as holy, as separate, as mature sons and daughters. Father, I ask you to go before us into this season of Thanksgiving, that we would thank you and honor you in all that we do. Help us indeed to reconnect with family, Father, where that family we may not be the closest to or may have issues with. I ask that you would help us to come to that time in humility, that we would be at peace with all those who we can be at peace at, Father, as far as it pertains to us. Help us to lay aside hurt and pride, that they would see Yeshua in us, that those things that may be a blockage would be taken down, Father, that it would be a true season of thanksgiving before you. Indeed. May you go before us and keep us safe. I ask all these things in the name of Lord Yeshua. Amen.